You say total.
Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Finance Committee meeting of Thursday, April 18th, 2024. Four items on the agenda. The first of these has a change. It was a Scrivener's error to put those four outside agency IT operations, flock cameras, and animal welfare funding on there. So we'll just have the discussion regarding the 2024-25 City of Norman budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you all know, we had the first of the study sessions to unveil the fiscal year 25 city manager's proposed budget on Tuesday. Most council members were there or have received the information. I assume that you're about 1/3 of the way through memorizing it. But again, as you have any questions related to the budget, feel free to give us a call. At least a couple of you have made times to meet with me about the budget, so we'll look forward to that. And again, we are just in the early phases of the final stages of the council's budget, and so anything that you want to take away or add, please let us know.
I'd like to compliment your staff and you on a tremendous job. You do it every year. It's hard. And Kim, it's just a wonderful job. Anything from council that you want to add? Item number 2, discussion updating the Urban Land Institute plan for the Griffin property.
Thank you, Your Honor. We've been trying to put together the puzzle pieces to ensure the city of Norman is in the best possible position that when the State Department of Mental Health begins to break pieces of real estate loose, council has input on what replaces existing state assets. We have in our possession an Urban Land Institute plan for the major campus portion between Main Street and Robinson. It's a little out of date. It included public infrastructure investments in things like a municipal swimming pool. And since that plan was presented to council, we built public swimming pools at Senior Wellness and at the Young Family Athletic Center. And of course, Westwood Pool is our busiest. We've got a lot of pools, and we're thinking maybe a pool no longer fits the plan. In order to help the state maximize the value on that piece of real estate, and of course, any dollar gain from the sale of real property in Norman is a dollar of taxpayers' money less that'll come out of the state budget to build additional hospital capacity. We'd actually made an offer to the State Department of Mental Health to purchase the soccer park and the Sutton Wilderness area for public purposes. We have appraisals that reflect the value as a soccer park and as a nature preserve. We also indicated in our offer that in order to help the state maximize the sales price, that we would support the entitlement of that property for development purposes. And kind of step one is, what is it council would like to see developed there? What would council support in a platting process? None of the land is platted. It doesn't have zoning. It's just, identified as public space on the map. And we thought a good first step might be updating that Urban Land Institute plan. We don't believe ULI is available to update it on our behalf in any kind of time frame that makes sense. But we wanted to get some input from council as to your desire to have that ULI document maybe be the starting point and then bring that up to current, council consideration and what you'd like to see happen. And if it's not ULI, some consultant to be able to help us out. It would be the basis from which a tax increment financing district could be established on that currently assessed at zero real property to help pay for the infrastructure necessary to support infill development.
Councilman?
I was going to say there have been some pretty big changes from 2015 to now. Some things that may not have been what somebody would consider financially viable, like a hotel, which was in the original plan, could actually be something that is sorely needed more than a pool. Things that could contribute to incentivizing this development could be historic tax credits, new market tax credits, and I'm thinking about mixed income housing. This is a perfect opportunity for density. And I was saying earlier, like with Center City, we saw how form-based code allowed density height-wise and how it could evolve towards the neighborhoods to be lower density and not as tall. Porter campus leaving is a huge change from 2015. I don't know if that was on anybody's radar.
I bet it was not in 2015. And the opportunity for council to recognize the tax exempt nature of the Porter campus, could it be, and I'm looking at Anthony and Catherine, to develop a new TIF on Griffin, could you also include a TIF on that Porter campus? Because it could become, privately held at some point in the not too distant future and automatically impact the tax rolls.
You could, I would think that there would be two separate districts, but I think you could.
Because they have to be contiguous.
Contiguous, yeah.
Yeah, I believe they both would qualify under the Commercial Development Act, so that's certainly possible.
Other things, the county's plans for the fairgrounds. I don't know if they've had those plans since 2015, but
It was since then. They did a study more recently than that.
so there's some synergy to think about. I'm thinking about a hotel, but I'm also thinking about, in the original plan, there was an ask for an arts cultural center. I do recognize that the chapel might require a lot of money to rehab, but the benefits are that you can't replicate that kind of architecture today. Anything you try to do with today's money will be a forgery. That is also a cultural cornerstone for the community, especially if you're going to build a whole community in that area. That will be the landmark for people when they're navigating around town. Maybe Lisa or somebody who worked on this back in the day might be able to talk about the chapel.
It's in bad shape.
It's a great building.
You might come to the
I
table.
think that there needs to be the chapel in particular needs to have quite a bit more research by
Structural engineer, perhaps?
structural engineers, architects. I haven't been in it since 2015. When I was in it, the main room, I guess, was gutted. It was completely vacant. There is water in the basement. It's my opinion that it's a flashing problem. Seems to be going around these days. That could possibly, it's a solid masonry structure. And when you walk around it, there's not a crack in it. So I think that, further investigation on that building at least, as well as, the rest of the buildings out there is warranted.
So yeah, I could see a way that historic tax credits and potentially low-income tax credits, because in the original plan it asked for an art cultural center that was not only venue but offices and some potential housing opportunities, in addition to outdoor space that allowed for more festivals and arts markets. So also building on the economy of Griffin and what could potentially be there. Also, back in the day, I don't think we had the same amount of activity with the soccer fields.
Correct.
And then downtown has grown quite a bit since 2015. So those are just some of the things that stand to mind that have changed over the course of time, and where some people might not see economic opportunity in 2015 terms is a completely different market now. And then also in regards to the pace of change, we have our AIM Norman Steering Committee work, and people are already asking for feedback about like where density can go. And it's good to keep in mind for this RFP that whoever's working on this needs to understand that the steering committee thinks we're going to be at 187,000 people by 2045. So I would really like to see density, multi-family, but multi-use, a smart development pattern so that you're not overwhelming the surrounding neighborhoods and you're kind of blending in and creating connectivity. We also have the water quality protection zones, which probably will mostly serve as green belts and not be developable. I think pocket neighborhoods weren't something that were talked about as much in the past. I think it's been around for 20 years, but in more recent times, especially when we think about people downsizing out of their housing and wanting to be in more communal spaces, like share the lawnmower or the garden, that would lend itself well to being on the edges of Griffin, along Carter and Main. You could have more commercial opportunity, multi-use, like housing on the top, commercial on the bottom along 12th. And potentially maybe the corner of Robinson, depends on how like the art thing works out. I'd also like to say, thinking about the historical context of the place, that, if encouraging like community gardens would harken back to the mental health aspect
It was
of that
1,000
site.
acres in full operation back in the day.
So I think a plan that comes forward needs to be mindful of the history of that site and then thinks about the density and the use of that site moving forward.
So I think it's Ward 7, Councilmember Holman, is it on South 12th or South Classen? It's kind of catty corner from the Taco Bell. I think there's mixed use development, some 3-story buildings that probably were, early in 12th and it's 12th.
Kingsgate.
Yeah, and that may have been kind of out on its own back when it was built, but yeah, that opportunity to bring those kinds of densities further north and take advantage of your major transportation corridors. You got a 4-lane with designated turn lanes on Robinson and a 4-lane with designated turn lanes on 12th, designed to move a lot of bodies. So if you really crank up your density, to not put those just on residential streets, but help direct that traffic to those major transportation corridors is a
And
big
there's a lot
plus.
of bus stops around there as well. And the connectivity to downtown, it's not that far of a walk.
Even is it senior living? I don't think it's assisted living, just next door to the fairgrounds. That's all new since past, more recent than 2015. There has been a lot of change.
You were.
Go ahead.
What I'd suggest we do is, as a council, sit down and define all these things are wonderful, but instead of in taking it, let's start some public conversations about the good stuff that you've got there. As we look at that, what other things we know, what things we can do to help the whole east side, what holistically is gonna work over there past 12th to maybe 24th. Define what we want prior to putting it out to an RFP and say, we want to keep the chapel, and if at all possible, what will it take to do that? And build it almost modularly, so that we can sit down and say, okay, the chapel works or it doesn't work.
Well, I thought this process was more for like defining the RFP to go out so that we can get something back that allows
that way.
us to plat it. Because I do feel it will be a recursive process and that we will get somebody, hopefully, who bites. And I kind of hope for a regional firm and not one that is from a different part of the country with a different market that doesn't really understand Oklahoma. So I'm hoping that would also be something when we're putting this RFP out, it gets into the hands of regional firms that can help us get to what we want. But I would like to move forward because I would like to see that land move through the sale. We're probably still going to take, I hate to be pessimistic, but maybe a year or two.
And could we, when we come up with a list of infrastructure, those things that we think TIF dollars would be used to fund, could you include TIF dollars to potentially rehabilitate the chapel?
Theoretically, yes.
So it's not a general fund expense, which just warms my heart. And then the opportunity for things like on Griffin property south of Main Street to say, and just the way it exists today, there's a lot of public services south of Maine, and I don't really see those land uses changing much. There's room for additional potential public services. Could you take TIF dollars generated north of Main Street to develop permanent shelter services south of Main Street?
Again, theoretically, yes.
So, you know, if you've got funding sources outside your general fund, which you recognize we're okay, but we're a little limited, you could really move the needle without having to make some really hard decisions about your general fund operations.
I'd also interject that the original plan envisioned maybe Norman Forward as also being a potential source of funding. So I do think something could be put together.
Yeah.
But honestly, I would just like to see us have some people submit to this, pick a firm, tell them what we want, and we can still have those conversations while staff gets the RFP written, sent out, and whatnot, and then it would come back to us, and we give more direction, I assume.
The more direction we give somebody to whom we would send an RFP, I think the less guessing that they have to do and the less managing to us. I agree with you, it's gotta be a region, it doesn't have to be. It ought to be a regional firm of one sort or another, because that's one of the ways we can get in trouble quickly, and to have somebody there. And I think particularly at first, if all we have to do now is, all you need is, do we need to plat or not plat, and how you wanna plat it, just big squares.
Yeah, just if we get general direction that council's interested in us taking some proactive steps to make sure council gets what it hopes to get on that infill property, yeah, we'll bring you back some recommendations on solutions to get from here to there. There's something to be said about, if you get really specific, you provide certainty to the market. If you get too specific, you may reduce creativity in the market. So there's a balance. There's not a right or a wrong. It's just certainty's good and creativity's good too.
Yeah, it'd just be a pity to write a PUD or a SPUD as soon as you finished rezoning something. But,
Yeah.
Stephen, I'm sorry, Councilmember Holmes.
Yeah, so I definitely would like to see an update for sure. I think that was a good thing 10 years ago that we did to prepare for all of that space potentially becoming available for development. But it was a long time before we started talking about getting rid of parking minimums. So it shows a lot of parking, surface parking in there that may not be necessary anymore. I think it shows a lot more intensive commercial only along the edges than I think would be needed and may now be more suitable to be mixed use stuff. And then we hadn't approved, the food and shelter location had not come forward at that time yet either, so I don't think that was anticipated. So including that, including other things that have changed, and it did include, a design around the stormwater channel that goes through there, Bishop Creek already, which was good, and having, green space features around that channel was a good piece of that. Thinking about things like the cathedral, even if it wasn't usable, if it's a sound structure, keeping it as a cultural landmark, I think, is a good idea. It'd be nice if it was usable, and I think with any amount of money, you can do anything, right? But being able to use a TIF mechanism perhaps to do something like that is something I think the community would really get behind too. Like people that are skeptical of TIFs and their use could really get behind. I could see them getting really behind it being used for something like that. Same thing with the main administration building and the Hope Hall, and maybe a few of the other buildings, the Edsel Ford House, restoring that. The Mackenzie Gardens, is it? And Francis Cape Park. Those things. And then when it comes to like a TIF, I had even really thought about either you could do like Porter to 12th and Robinson down to Alameda, or you could do the tracks all the way to 12th. And you could even draw it so it includes that Walmart Supercenter. Could we do that?
Theoretically, yes.
So that way, in any increment in growth
Now,
in
remember,
that.
there would not be that much incremental tax from the Walmart, it's there.
Sure, but as the east side, I assume if we built a whole new neighborhood next to it across the street, that sales may go up at that Walmart. So
And
we could
potentially,
capture it maybe.
without parking minimums, other outbuildings could pop up
Well,
in that.
and it could be a way
parking
for
lot.
us to invest into downtown and the neighborhoods around it using money generated by that Walmart, which in many cases hurts downtowns and things like that. So a way to kind of,
There's a lot of shopping in there.
Yeah,
There's all
yeah.
that goes along 12th and
and that would include the hospital too. So including the Griffin and and Porter campus in one large TIF, or you could have a separate downtown TIF and then a Griffin TIF. But
Yes, Catherine.
I would like the idea of just including the whole tracks to 12th
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, we should ask Catherine about
How big it can be.
boundaries and whatnot.
I mean, really, it has to be contiguous. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah, it would be
primary
contiguous.
requirement. You would want to be, I think, strategic about the purpose behind each TIF because it can become an identity for that area. So if you draw it too big, it kind of loses some of that. You can use it to fund public projects. You can use it to provide assistance in developer financing. So there's a lot of things you can do to both provide for public improvements, to improve the chapel, to improve other buildings, but also put in infrastructure that helps make it easier for a developer to make the decision to come and locate in that area. So there's lots of ways we could do it. And it really probably depends more on what you all think the goals and objectives of each area should be. You can do a large project area in multiple increment districts. That's what Oklahoma City does. So that's one way to do it as well, and that gives you a lot of options. So when you're ready to trigger one district, you can trigger it now, and then, in 5 years, maybe we're ready to do downtown. Well, it's already set up. You just have to trigger that increment district. So there's lots of ways we can look at it comprehensively and still move forward with pieces when we're ready.
It could be used to repair or build new sidewalks in original town site and old courthouse, and
Yeah.
old silk stockings if we included it.
oh, now I see.
Alleyways, if we wanted to do that, curb and gutter, stormwater issues. So that's why I was thinking it could be used to help entice the development on the Griffin, but if we included the neighborhoods around it, it could be used to update all their infrastructure too, which is the oldest infrastructure in town, so.
It'll all come down to how much.
So I was saying we could use some of that
Yeah.
increment off of Walmart Supercenter to help pay for new sidewalks and curbs and all that stuff in the
East
old
Main
neighborhoods.
Place.
And so that's just one idea though about how a TIF area could work, but I do like the idea of updating it to reflect some of the current things we've talked about. There's an opportunity to, extend Frank Street and Rich Street and Oliver Street and just continue the historic, grid pattern of the neighborhood and have density and preserve some of the history of it and have a new neighborhood that reflects the history of what was there and what it meant to Norman, all these years. So, yeah, I like the idea of the council as a whole having a more detailed conversation in the public too, but getting something out there to ideally local firm or regional that can update it for us. So I don't think we need ULI to update it for us.
And
And
just
we did it,
understand, it
so-
probably would not be ULI.
Right.
ULI is a group of volunteers that are planners and architects that take on these projects nationally. They did one for downtown Oklahoma City after the Memorial bombing. They did one when this potential land became available for development, and the state was gonna move off of the current Griffin site. But that's the sort of projects that they look for. But again, as far as hiring a consultant to do an update would probably not be ULI.
Right.
It might be a ULI member, but it would be a firm that, locally or regionally or.
I'll get my tongue to work, it'll be a lot easier. For today's discussion, do we want to go ahead and give the manager the ability to be able to go down and plat it and we can talk about,
No, I would think what we'd be looking for is direction to go do an RFP for.
Okay,
For somebody to help
update
us
to the
update
ULI
that
plan.
plan.
Yeah.
And we'll bring you that back for council formal action.
Yeah, those are things I'm looking for in that RFP for sure.
Yeah, so you would develop the RFP, present it at council, we would weigh in, revisions if needed, and then it would go out.
Yep, and then we'll bring you back a firm through that process to update the plan.
what would you estimate that costs? Great, Anthony told me no gravy.
That may be a Jane question, but yeah, we'll bring you back cost estimates with it and how we go about getting it paid for.
Thank you, sir. All right.
As far as a TIF, does that go, is that a separate?
Separate and
Conversation, yeah.
probably following shortly thereafter. What we would need in order to get the TIF established is a willing property owner. And that could very well be the state. I would think their ability to sell it to a different buyer to say, yes, we want to do a TIF, they're gonna need a little more certainty before they can get enough value out of it to actually make the sale. So I do believe there will be appropriate pressure placed on the state to say, yes, we will support a TIF on this real estate before the sale.
It's wonderful. This is really another exciting thing to do. It's just another major change in how Norman's gonna go, and I think it'll be fun to see what happens over the next year and a half, however long this takes, to be able to realize those dreams as best we can.
In the timetable on, if we're fortunate, we'll be able to bust off the soccer field, bust off Sutton Wilderness, even bust off the stuff south of Main Street and get that, in public hands or in private and nonprofit hands. We know the hospital's gonna stay where it is in full operation for at least 3 years while the new hospital gets built that they broke ground on in the last month. So we have a little time.
Red Rock.
Yeah, as long as we can get the other pieces broken off and get some money in their coffers, I think they'll be patient and willing participants to go through this process with us.
Anybody got anything further that they wanna comment? Okay. Thank you. It's a cool idea. Discussion regarding monthly revenue and expenditure reports. Mr.
Really nothing to add this month, Mr. Mayor. I would just point out that the appropriations that you've made are listed there and draw your attention to that. But the largest of those, of course, has been for the fire trucks. So that's really all. I'll just be glad to respond to any questions that you may have.
Yes, sir.
Just note that 4 out of the last 5 months have been positive bars on the bar graph. Compared to the year, last month was down, but the 3 out of the last 4 have been up, including this past one. And then, looks like the last 3 months, we've been inching closer to being at the projected revenue for the year, so doing pretty good. And always interesting to see the city's comparison, so. Anything of note, Anthony, about national stuff, trends, cities?
Nothing new. The Fed recently kind of responded to inflation reports by saying they're probably not going to aggressively adjust interest rates over the next quarter or two. And the market responded to that, but nothing real earth-shattering.
Not any retail trends you've noticed or anything?
No, again, we continue to monitor things. We're on this flat trajectory. And I think that's a real thing now. We've been on that trajectory for almost a year now, so.
Okay. Thanks.
Sorry. Anything else for Mr. Francisco? All right, item number 4, internal audits program status, please.
The fun stuff. Hello, Mayor, Council. So the update, we have internal audit is, we have internal control assessments out. Internal control assessments is the first step to a risk assessment process. As we know, risk assessments are used to develop the audit plan. Internal control assessments are used to inform the risk assessment, identify those risks, identify the gaps that can be fulfilled or made more effective, made more efficient. We are about halfway through those. Next week, I have a one-on-one meeting with each department head to discuss the content of their IC assessments or internal control assessments. In May, we will move forward with performing a risk assessment based on those internal control assessments, and identifying the highest, the functions, divisions, departments, programs, and activities that present the highest risk to the city and the city's objectives. In June, I will compile a audit plan for the triennial period, which is a 3-year period. July, I will deliver you an audit plan. As far as investigation concerning the FSI contract K222356 awaits Darryl Piles, the city manager's comments or his response. And also, we await the status of those responses as far as the implementation of the recommendations go.
Okay. Questions from council? You nailed it.
Yeah, I'm having fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anything else from council? Then I guess we get my favorite word. We're adjourned. Thank you. This